I didn't even know when I started writing the book that it will be published. I had this plan that maybe after I retired from my work as an academic, I would try to publish all of my writings. But I thought it would be a while before it happened. I didn't know people like them, or they're not based on actual people. I just wanted to write about when I started this book, I was writing my doctoral dissertation. And I was thinking a lot about what it means to be a young woman in Ghana. And as it tends to be the case, I start writing about something and it just evolves into something completely different. So the book started off as a character that was very much like me, a young woman who had spent many years away from Ghana and was returning and trying to fit in. And then it then took a very different turn and became a book about a young woman who ends up in a marriage with a man she does not know. And I'm fine with that because I think my personal story is not particularly interesting. So I'd rather write about totally fictional people. But yeah, so that's how the book came to be. And really it's an exploration of women's positions and women's authority, and also how society can sometimes confine us and compel us into certain arrangements that we might not want. And Afi ends up in an arranged marriage. I will admit that I don't know anyone who's had an arranged marriage. Arranged marriages are not common in Ghana. But I also thought I want to write about the most or something that's very unusual, because I think that's part of what is fun about writing fiction for me. I could write about my personal experiences. I could write about things that I see all the time, but I even enjoy more writing about things that I don't see a lot or that I've never seen before. I don't know anyone in an arranged marriage. I also don't know anyone my age who is and not to say this doesn't happen, but who is one of several wives in a marriage. So for me, it was just interesting to write about these things that do happen, but are not common, and that I personally have not experienced. Afi meets Elikem. Elikem is the man she's kind of encouraged to marry, and she ends up falling for him. I did not, at least in the very beginning. First of all, the book didn't start off with Afi at all. It started off with a very different woman. So I did not see it coming. And then it kind of happened naturally. And it's something I enjoy about writing, where I have a plan. And then as I get to know the characters, the story or the characters, I mean, I never allow my characters to just take control and I'm just like following them. But I do allow my characters to speak and allow them to co-lead the writing process. And so this was a case of my characters. And well, first of all, I think that happens because when I'm imagining the story in the beginning, and almost all of it happens in my head. I don't write things down. I don't plot things on a board or anything. But the characters tend to be a bit flat when they're in my head. But as I start writing, they start growing parts and they become fuller. And I think in them becoming fuller, I also began to understand them more and to understand or know their personalities and understand their desires. So when I was writing His Only Wife, I would often be walking down the street and be like, "Oh, would I feel like this store? Would I feel, want to go to this place?" Because I get to know the characters so well that I can even begin to think about their likes and dislikes and such. So it's in getting to know the characters well that the story begins to develop. And then you have things like I feel falling in love, even though in my head, that wasn't, I think, something that I had planned when I was initially planning the story. If you ask academics, our work doesn't get read often, and we don't get profiled in newspapers and such or reviewed. And you don't have book clubs often created to discuss our academic research. So it was a totally different experience, but I appreciate both of them equally, and it was equally rewarding. But yes, it went out, and I just thought, oh, I hope people read the book, and people did read the book, and it was just, and I don't think I'll ever get used to the fact that I write books and people people read the books. I think I'll be eternally grateful for it. So yes, it was a very different experience, and I absolutely enjoyed it. I got to meet, I mean, my publishers are amazing. They did an amazing job in terms of publicity, but I also got to meet other writers because I don't know writers. So Night Bloom, I wrote Night Bloom before His Only Wife was published, which I'm really happy about. So, you know, I didn't have any feedback from anyone about my first book, and I went ahead to write my second book. And I like that it wasn't in any way changed by what I'd heard from other people about the first piece of work. But so once again, this story started off as something very different. It started off as a story about 5 friends who who left school many years before and returned. Some of them were living outside of Ghana and returned for a high school reunion. And then we get to see all of their lives. But as is always the case with my writing, it turned into a very different story, and I'm very fine with that. And so, yes, Akofa and Selassie were 2 characters that I, from the very beginning, once it was no longer about a school reunion, I knew that they were going to be the central characters in this book. This was also a different experience from His Only Wife, because His Only Wife, you have one central character, and her story is kind of very straightforward. And with Night Bloom, I had these 2 characters who were in conflict with each other to an extent. Yet I wanted to be fair to both of them and to present their sides of the story. So each person, and so that is, the book is structured as such. So that it's about these 2 cousins, Akofa and Selassie, who start off as the best of friends. But over many years, a rift develops, and we follow them for about 20 years. Akofa moves to the US to start a new life. Selassie is in Ghana. And we see how the events that happen in their childhood continue to dictate their paths in life. And the story is structured in such a way that there are 3 parts. There's Akofa's section, there's Selassie's section, and there's a 3rd section told by a neutral, or what I wanted to be a neutral narrator. And Akofa and Selassie are telling the same story, but each of them believe something different happened. And so in crafting the book, this was very key. How do I tell a story about 2 people who are describing the same thing, but saying that it happened or happened in a different way? And so that's how you end up with this structure. But at the same time, I was always thinking about, I don't want to be repetitive, but how do you tell the same story 2 times without being repetitive? And it was just a lot of fun to work with. And I spent many years reworking the structure. But what I ended up doing is, even when both characters were telling the same, describing the same event, they were often describing it from a different angle. So, for example, there's when they are children, Akofa and Selassie were not attending the same school, but then they start attending the same school. And Akofa goes to a really expensive school, and her mother, so Akofa goes to a very expensive school, and then Selassie's mother tries to get Selassie into that expensive school, that private school. And Akofa's mother sees it as keeping up with the Joneses. Selassie's mother is trying to compete with them, and she doesn't like it, and that they just need to focus on the school she's in and make her a better student there instead of moving her to this private school. So when Akofa tells the story, she tells it from her mother's angle, in which her mother feels her mother is describing Selassie's mother as being a bit jealous, as being competitive, and it's a conversation in Akofa's household. Selassie describes the same events, but when she tells it from her mother's perspective and how her mother just wanted a better life for her, and therefore wanted her to move to this better school, this private school. And it wasn't about competition. It wasn't about keeping up with the Joneses. She just wanted to give her daughter a better life. So even when both characters describe the same event, you get to see it from a different angle. And I did that because I wanted to use the form to demonstrate how we can have multiple versions of the truth, but also how our memory plays games with us, or even we manipulate our memory to make things more acceptable to us. Talking about form and craft a bit more, something else that I did, once again, to avoid being repetitive, was that I gave them, there are very subtle differences in their voices. If one reads very closely, you'd find that even the way in which they speak English differs. You find that Selassie tends to be more flowery in her telling of events, where Akofa is more precise and is free of anything extra in her articulation of what happened in their childhood and when they become adults. And so I basically wanted to use the form, the structure, to reflect the tensions and the similarities, but also the differences that we have between these two women.